Hey, how you doing? It is I, the Terrific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy, and welcome to Retro Horror School and a happy Friday to you. Boy, it's been a week, but it's been a fast week, and we're already here at Friday, so yes, we made it. But enough of that. On to today's video. Every so often on social media, I see comments on horror movies. You know, as you do when you're a horror person and you like browsing social media. And often on discussions, there are people who are on the side of horror movies having political and social commentary. And then there are other people that are on the side of, well, horror movies like don't really have that. I just watch them to escape from all the crap that's going on in my life and in the world. And both ways of approaching horror movies are valid. So let's discuss those two sides and how to approach horror movies. You could approach them through a political and social commentary lens, or you could approach them from a purely escapist lens. Here we go. Horror as political and social commentary. There are many people that argue that horror movies are inherently political and have inherent social commentary in them. That these kinds of horror movies and horror movies in general hold a lens up to society and invite us to look at ourselves through that lens or look at ourselves through the mirror that is held up and critique society's flaws, beliefs, and thoughts. On the site mysteryandsuspense.com, there is a sentence that sums up horror as political and social commentary. Horror has a unique ability to make audiences confront uncomfortable truths. By wrapping societal critiques in layers of suspense and terror, the genre ensures that these messages aren't just heard, they're felt. The visceral reactions elicited by horror, the goosebumps, the racing heart, the urge to hide behind a cushion, amplify the impact of the underlying social commentary. In other words, putting political and social commentary in a genre that is meant to make you feel fear, shock, and disgust kind of forces you to pay attention. Some examples of horror movies that have political and social commentary in them are George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. It is a work that is packed with commentary. It isn't just about surviving a zombie apocalypse. It tackles issues like race relations and societal breakdown. And another example is Dawn of the Dead, which came out in 1978 and blatantly attacks America's obsession with consumerism as the movie is set in a mall. Another example of horror movies that have political and social commentary are movies by John Carpenter. When he directs his films, he often comments on society, and his films often reflect those views on society and politics. For instance, They Live. They Live is a direct commentary on consumerism. And if you know the famous line, I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I am all out of bubblegum. This line encapsulates and shows how people want to fight against the kind of control that society tends to place on us. In that movie, what are they fighting against? They're fighting against the subliminal alien messages of control. Halloween is another example of a movie that comments on society. It subtly critiques American values and the sense of safety in small communities. So it kind of shows you that nowhere is safe and you have to be on your guard. Haddonfield is just this small town where people think that they're safe, but they're not. And more recently, horror films as social commentary you see in a lot of Jordan Peele's work. especially the movie Get Out. This is a film that directly explores systemic racism, and it is a perfect example of how horror can confront and challenge societal norms. Then we got horror as just pure escapism, or from a purely escapist perspective. There are people that think that and argue that most horror needs to be enjoyed from a purely escapist perspective, that horror does not have any kind of underlying political or social messages behind it, and that horror films need to be appreciated for the creativity and storytelling, the special effects, and the ability to evoke emotions of fear, shock, and disgust. For instance, one could argue that Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street is about this monster that haunts people in their dreams. It is a terrifying monster, and it is meant to immerse us in an atmosphere of fear and suspense, and is not necessarily meant to comment on society. You could also argue that The Conjuring and the movies in that franchise are just meant to delve into the atmosphere of the paranormal, again, without any kind of greater political or social commentary underlying it. Friday the 13th and the movies in those franchises, you could argue that it's just about watching a hockey mask killer with a machete going around stalking and killing teenagers. You could argue that you're watching it just for the gore and the body count, and not necessarily because there is any kind of deeper meaning or political and social commentary behind it. But are there movies that can balance both approaches? I say there are. There are some movies that can balance the approach of having both political and social commentary while also offering a sense of escapism. The Babadook, for instance, is a movie that explores grief and mental illness and the effect that it has on families and the commentary behind that. But it can also be approached as a purely escapist psychological horror film. The Witch, another example, could be a movie that you approach as a purely just kind of supernatural folk horror experience, but you could also approach it as a commentary on religious fanaticism as well as societal isolation. And there you have it. This video is not very long today, but what I want to say is, however you decide to approach horror, whether it's from and through a lens of it having political and social commentary, whether it's through a lens of being purely escapist, or whether you feel that you can balance the two, all approaches are valid. But what I do want to point out is that saying things like horror never has political and social commentary, or horror is just not fun at all, you can't use it for comfort and you can't use it to escape or approach it from an escapist perspective. Be very careful before making those kinds of statements, because saying something never has something is a very definitive statement. I would encourage you, whenever you are watching horror movies, to be an active viewer, to pay attention, and then decide for yourself, well, is this movie trying to speak to me from a point of political or social commentary? Is this movie trying to speak to me as just something fun? Or is it kind of blending the two? So, there is my call to action to you. Now, what I would like to ask now is, how do you like to approach your horror movies? Do you like to approach them from the lens of political and social commentary? Do you like to approach them as, well, it's a purely escapist form of entertainment? Or do you think that both approaches can be blended? Let me know in the comments below. And sadly, class is dismissed, everybody, for now, but I will see you next time. Bye.